All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marissa Osado Moreno, and I'm faculty in the dance department as well as part of PDC here at SMC. Very excited to hear all the wisdom of today's session entitled What Balance? Avoiding Work-Life Balance Traps. And we have two very special guests, Dr. Amanda Sullivan and Drs. Miranda Kucera. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand in the participants thing. You know how this Zoom thing goes. And with that, I'll let you both take it away. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much to the PDRC for inviting us in, and thank you all for choosing to spend this time with us. So we're pleased to share with you what we hope will be helpful information to you as new faculty here. And as you can maybe tell from our title slide, we have some pronounced views on this topic. So we'll go ahead to the agenda. So this hour is probably going to go pretty quickly. So we've got a fairly streamlined agenda in store. We'll introduce ourselves and discuss kind of our perspectives on work-life balance, although we've already given you a spoiler. We'll highlight some of the common traps that we've encountered ourselves, as well as in our mentoring activities. And then we'll discuss some different strategies we hope that will be helpful to you here as you begin your positions. So I'm Amanda. I'm a tenured professor in my 13th year of academia. I'm also a mom, a daughter, a sister, a friend, and more. And my roles in higher ed have varied over time. Right now, I'm in a position that is primarily administrative, as well as research advising and fairly limited classroom teaching, although that's somewhat unique to kind of this year and the last couple since the pandemic started. And a lot of this work that we're going to talk about now, just around early career supports and faculty development, generally started out as I was kind of settling into my career here about 10 years ago, and just trying to figure out what end is up, because I didn't have a traditional mentoring experience as a doctoral student. And so in kind of launching my tenure track career, very, very quickly realized there's so much that I didn't know, and really had no idea about what I was doing, to be frank. And so I lucked into meeting somebody who had become a really close collaborator and friend at a conference, 11 years ago now, Bryn Harris, who's at the University of Colorado, Denver. And we ended up putting together a series of professional development sessions for one of the national conferences in our field, which is school psychology, to really help us understand all of the topics about being successful in higher ed that we didn't get in our doctoral programs. And so this was really everything from how do you even begin to understand how to write grants, to understanding like really the background of the publishing process. We also had a session that Miranda was involved in on work-life balance, how to teaching prep effectively and efficiently. Like I said, all the things that we didn't know how to do, even though we had our jobs. And that turned into a committee that was sponsored by a few different professional associations in our field, and now has a blog, and we run programming that ranges from PD sessions like this, which it's so amazing that your institution is putting this together for you, because a lot of us are at places that didn't or don't routinely do that. We also have things like writing groups and different mentoring programs. So it really like spawned this entire like network of folks in this body with like a budget and like timelines and all of those things. And now that I've kind of shifted from, like, obviously I'm not pre-tenure anymore, I've moved into a more kind of advisor facilitator role from that. But it still remains this area of work that I'm really committed to as a scholar, because there's so much kind of hidden curriculum about like, what do you need to do to be effective in these spaces? I do recognize though now that I am constantly needing to check my privilege as like a tenured full professor, because it's a very different kind of game than I was in like 11 years ago when we started all that. So I do recognize that as we move throughout the rest of today's session.
I am Miranda Kucera. I am a school psychologist by day, and I teach graduate students in the Department of Education at University of Washington, Tacoma in the evenings. I previously actually met Amanda at Arizona State, so we've known each other for quite a while now. I started teaching community college at Sierra College, actually in Northern California. So that was how I started my teaching. And then when I moved up here, I was fortunate to connect to University of Washington, Tacoma. Honestly, my interest in this area has often been spurred by being irritated with people asking me how I do it all or why I do it all, or I couldn't possibly be doing things well if I'm doing this many different projects or tasks or jobs or whatever. And a lot of that has come from questions of how could you possibly be a mom and do these things? Or how could you be a partner and do these things? And it made me angry. And I've talked to Amanda about those feelings a lot. And here we are. She asked if I wanted to be a part of this, and I definitely have a lot of feelings around it. So as you will see, we have a lot of feelings about these different topics. And a lot of it comes from just this idea that these entities are separate. And I think that's where we first fail, and we first fall into this trap that we're actually able to separate these two entities, and that there is some sort of perfect balance that we're all able to achieve. And I think that's a lie. And we can't continue to operate thinking that these two are separate and that we can't achieve a balance, because we're constantly going to be chasing something that we can't achieve in that kind of sense. And part of that is because we have so many different roles. We are parents or siblings, and we're children, and we're friends, and might be in a supervisor position. We're all employees of someone. We may have partners, we're community members. We have so many different pieces of our lives. And we're certainly not here to tell you how to fulfill all your roles, because only you know what that looks like. But it's really about not giving up on our career goals, not giving up on our personal goals. It's really about rethinking our place within the structures that we're in, and also the responsibility that the institutions that we're a part of, the responsibility that they have as well to help us grow and achieve all of our goals. So we recognize that you all have worked really hard to get to where you are. And there are a lot of structural inequities that have certainly impacted your ability to get to where you are. In particular, women have more student debt, so that's an additional burden that a lot of us have. There's the motherhood penalty, the idea that becoming a mother or a father while you're trying to navigate academia will set you back. Higher risks of harassment and assaults, being tracked into lower paying areas of study. And then when we come into capitalism, I'm sure a lot of you have already talked about academic capitalism and the faculty salary gap, the adjunctification of higher ed, and of course, racism, where we have a lot of underrepresentation in faculty for people of color. Very low percentages of people of color are tenured faculty in higher education. Sorry, my slides didn't want to turn. So one of the other traps when we think about all of these different ways of thinking that are making us consider that there is some perfect equilibrium that we're trying to achieve. Another one is this idea of individualism. And when we think about competition, obviously there's a lot of competition to get the positions that we have, but then once we have them, we seem to continue to compete, and that keeps us from being able to collaborate with our peers. An example is I've asked for different people's syllabi as I prepare new courses. I'm part of a brand new program at the University of Washington, Tacoma, and so trying to create classes from scratch is incredibly exhausting. So trying to reach out and say, hey, can you share your syllabi with me? Or what kind of assignments have you tried to do? And it's very hard to get that piece of collaboration. It seems to be that we feel this possessiveness of our work. And so then if we share it, then it's less valued. Or if I take somebody else's ideas, does that mean that I've worked less hard? there just seems to be all of these barriers to a really clear collaboration to help support each other once we're all in a faculty place. You could even think around ideas of like collaborative workshopping for syllabi or assignments, or I tried to kind of spring the idea of having assignments that cross different classes in a graduate course. So if we have an assignment that matches the objectives of two different classes, why can't we have more of a collaboration between those pieces? And that's just not something that I've seen. So trying to get it to be achieved is even harder because it requires so much more collaboration and ideas and thinking outside of what we're used to doing everything on our own.
This can also lead to a related problem of kind of the comparison trap. So even for folks who are generally cognizant of the issues around individualism, this trap can be one that's hard to shake. And I find myself in so many conversations with early career and mid-career folks too, who are constantly looking around at the work others are doing and coming away with this notion of that they are somehow less, or that their work is somehow less valuable, less meaningful. Whether it's comparing somebody who's got a different profile of activities and therefore different accomplishments or achievements, and then making negative interpretation of their own productivity and success, or just comparing to a colleague who seems to be like more well-rounded because they're able to fit in time-consuming habits and concluding that somehow we must be doing something wrong. And I know I do that. Like I remember being on a conference call one summer, and one of the senior folks on the call was talking about how like this was their first meeting that month and they'd been sailing every day. And I was just like, most days it's all I can do just to get through bedtime with my kid. And yet like the notion of having like this high intensity kind of external activity automatically kind of shifts into those kind of comparisons about like, what are they doing? What are the outcomes that they're doing? And what does that mean about me? And that's not to say that all comparisons are bad. So when, for instance, when I'm talking to pre-tenure faculty in units and universities that have really ambiguous language about renewal and promotion, one thing I recommend is looking at the CVs of recently tenured faculty as one way to understand how policies are actually enacted. So as one piece of like multiple sources of data that we can use to kind of triangulate to understand how that feature of the institution is actually operating. And I suggest people do that because I often find that folks have really inflated impressions of what they need to do to keep their jobs or to get that promotion and tenure. And so I recommend not so much the comparison, but just developing like a set of examples, context-specific examples, because oftentimes the expectations vary so much from institution to institution that, like in my college, they use a lot of language around potential and excellence, and those are essentially meaningless. And so how people can understand whether they're folks who are applying for jobs or thinking about accepting positions with us, or just trying to think about strategizing around how they can think about how to align their activities with the expectation for renewal and promotion. That can be really helpful. So comparison for purely informational purposes is one thing, and I think can be useful also in case when we have conversations or disputes really about like equity in work assignments or compensation. Informational comparisons are helpful. When it becomes really problematic is when it's not being used for information or inspiration or motivation, but rather to kind of trigger the self-doubt and self-recrimination about what we're doing. And oftentimes these comparisons are faulty because they don't take into consideration differences in years of experience, differences in resources and supports, differences in role assignment or expectations. Like even now, like I have to remind myself that given the way my actual FTE or work assignment is articulated, I shouldn't be looking at my research output in a given year and comparing my publications, grant funding, collaborations, partnerships with somebody who's spending 100% of their time on that research that I just don't have the luxury to do because that's not what my job is. But that can be a common trap that's really hard to shake.
Another trap that I'm sure we are all familiar with is the imposter syndrome. So this is, of course, when you're doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud and you're just waiting for someone to find out that you've been fooling them this whole time and you really don't know what you're doing. And when thinking about this, trying to shift the thinking into what is the workplace doing to perpetuate this concept, especially in women, because it was actually designed to describe women's feelings. So how does the workplace perpetuate this through microaggressions, through discrimination, through these underpinnings of rugged individualism? And how are these perpetuating this idea that women don't belong in the workplace? Not to continue to blame yourself for not feeling like you belong, but what is the environment doing to make you feel like you don't belong?
And so for a lot of us who come from historically and systematically excluded groups, for me, it comes back to like understanding the imposter syndrome isn't a feature of who we are and what we're doing, but rather a byproduct of the white supremacy baked into the system, and the gendered expectations of our roles and functioning is what brought it first to the fore in that research that resulted in the initial kind of articulation of imposter syndrome. But shifting that locus of control and that blame for those feelings and those perceptions from internally to the context is really important. And so we wanted to give folks a little bit of time, because we know you've been in back-to-back sessions, and we're going to continue to get into a variety of different conversations throughout this. We don't have a huge group, so what I'm just going to do is open 2 breakout rooms, but we just wanted to give you a little chance to interact with each other and talk about what kind of thoughts does this bring up about just the notion of these different traps and imposter syndrome. Has anything we've said so far kind of like brought up a big aha, or any kind of major wonderings or questions, or just a really strong emotional response? And so we'll give you 5 minutes to go into your groups together, and I'll open them up so you can go ahead and pop over, and then we'll come back and chat as a whole group.
Oh, let me tell them.
Well, so welcome back, everybody. Or we're still waiting for 3 more people. We have about 15 seconds. So does anybody have any reflections they wanted to share from your discussion in your groups? You're welcome to unmute or you can put it in the chat.
I think in our group, I thought what was pretty valuable was trying to meet goals, and are those personal goals for students and being a professor, and how can we make reasonable goals for ourselves? You know, that was one of the things that we talked about was, you know, can I get there? And maybe I'm not going to get it at the time that I wanted to achieve this. So that was kind of an aha to me. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's something that a lot of us can struggle with. And I know, like, when I came to my current institution, one thing that I found really helpful in just kind of spurring my thinking about goal setting around how I thought about like my long-term goals and trajectories was, I remember being in a tenure and promotion seminar, and they provided like a graph that showed like everybody's like by gender and race trajectories towards promotion to different levels. And for the group I'm in, so women of color, there was just like, there weren't enough people who had been promoted to full to even have a line on the graph. And I was just like, what do I do with that? But it did make me think really strategically about how I understand my role and my time, and just trying to like figure out what kind of conversations I even had to start having with people, and the types of reflection I had to engage in to begin to think about what kind of timelines made sense, what even the timelines could be, and what the different goals could be. Because all I had was a tenure code and a job, and at the time it was like quite literally a file box to fill with the things that I would eventually present as part of my case. But I didn't know what to do with that empty box. And so thinking about how to make those realistic goals is really a key piece. Do any of the other groups want to share anything that came up in your, or any of the other folks about what came up in your discussion?
In our group, I kind of shared a little bit about how I felt like these ideas around competition and imposter syndrome kind of carried from graduate school and previous schooling, and how they carried into my other work. And I like that, Marissa's here somewhere, but I like how she mentioned that, you know, although in some departments, you know, we start off, there may not be as much sharing or, you know, collaborating. Since the pandemic, when we all had to make that transition to remote learning, we all went into this fight mode in a sense, right? And everybody was sharing everything because we needed to survive, right? And so I just like how she mentioned that in the sense of how our context or time may change the perspective of who's in this together and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, if it happens in units, that's wonderful. I know like in school psych, Bryn and I actually like had started like a whole sharing resource, because for many of us, we've never taught exclusively online. We've never, in our area too, all of our students are on field work in schools, and how to even think about facilitating that when the schools are closed, when none of us can be together physically the way we're used to. And so yeah, that kind of impetus to do the sharing that hadn't been happening systematically before, hopefully that's something that continues. Yeah. Anything else anybody would like to share? Okay, we can go ahead and move to the next couple traps that we wanted to cover. So one thing I think too that a lot of us got really good at in graduate school, right, was kind of deferring our needs and constantly like thinking about like things will be better once I get through this milestone or once I get through this process, and putting off different activities or really what were like for many people like personal or family considerations. A lot of that's something that too that carries over even after we've finished. And so we all know that if you're all here, you've made it through that process, you're really great at deferred gratification, delayed gratification, and whatnot. But the fact that many of us carry it over into our professional roles post-grad can be really detrimental. And as I mentioned, like one thing I did a lot when I was earlier out is doing these kind of professional development activities. I did a lot of early career research mentoring, because even though I was in a PhD program, my advisor wasn't actually a researcher. So that created all kinds of like hurdles that I had to figure out post-degree once I was in my role. And one thing that really stood out as I was doing the different mentoring activities, especially around research, was that so many conversations with the mentors I got matched up to when they were women or femmes came back to deferring and delaying relationships and decisions about growing families and things. And for some people, it was like, oh, I just want to get through tenure. For others, it was, I thought I had to get such and such grant or such and such milestone. But they kept coming back to like how severely they regretted those choices. And so instead of having research mentoring about how to get a grant, it turned into these conversations about how not to let those processes that we and those goals that we thought we needed to be chasing be the thing that we built our whole lives around. Because now that they're in their like very senior, and oftentimes these were people who were nearing retirement, and part of what they were doing was doing this kind of national mentoring activities through the professional associations with new grads and new faculty. A lot of those conversations came back to the things that they regretted and these deferred needs, whether it was engaging in basic self-care, which a lot of times when we talk about self-care, it gets positioned as if it's those things that are like survival things, like basic nourishment and rest. And like there's just really basic functions that we have to engage in day to day to stay like fundamentally well, not optimizing, but just like fundamentally well. Because part of the habit around like grind culture and like the lean in stuff was as if like all of those things, like the professional stuff comes first, and like all like the hustle and like even like a lot of the grit conversations that get translated into higher ed, a lot of it turns into like putting aside these basic things about caring for ourselves and others while you focus on getting through that next milestone or that next achievement, or once you get to whatever that like hallowed like whatever is that you can do those things. But one of the challenges is that the way that opportunities flow in a lot of higher ed and in the spaces that we engage in, that means that this deferral often becomes indefinite because there's always something around the corner that we didn't account for. And there's always going to be more opportunities than are physically possible to take advantage of. And so falling into that trap, always putting it off, that things will be better after if I can just get through this semester, or I'll think about this. And I do it too, because like in joking with one of my friends, our kids are the same age and we're in the same department and we have very similar challenges and kind of the things we deal with day to day. But like this notion of like, I'm ready for June. I just need, if I can just get to June, everything will be better. But it's probably not going to magically get that way. And so putting off those kind of like personal considerations isn't a recipe for any kind of well-being. And we think about it too in terms of you can do that work now to take care of yourself and to do those things that you know are right for you. Or you may lose the opportunity, or more likely like put yourself in a position where burnout and all of the like really like wear and like degradation of your mental and physical health that happens is what you're really putting forth instead of that just next month or next semester or after I get tenure or after I get that R1, whatever it is. So I think calling it out is a really important thing. So we can go to that next slide. The other piece that I find myself increasingly talking to people about, and I think especially because of COVID and so many things moved remote, and I think it made a lot of us much more aware of all the different pieces that went into things. A conversation that I end up having a lot with folks is about not discounting their labor, where they're actually doing all kinds of different things, whether it's even the hundreds, if not thousands of emails that we have to do, or all of these. I don't know if you all have had this experience, but many more meetings than we used to have before, so many more emails. Our students need a lot more support than they did a few years ago, right? And so that's taking time. But reminding ourselves that whether it's technical labor, emotional labor, whatever it is, it's still work. But what I find is a lot of conversations with folks, they get to the end of a day, or the end of a week or a month, where they've done a lot of those things that aren't the classroom instruction or aren't the activities that result in a really concrete product. And they say, well, I haven't done anything this week, or I haven't done anything today. I've got no work done today because all I did was sit in meetings, or all I did was answer emails, or all I did was grade. And so like what I do in my role as like a supervisor to all these different people, or as a mentor, as just like a senior person in my department, is remind people and remind the other folks who are in supervisor and administrative positions that all of that is essential labor for the work that we're doing. Whether it's supporting a student or doing all the prep for a day of class or writing feedback on the work they do, that is all essential labor. And so it triggers a lot of different questions about the assumptions we have about what is work, what is productivity, what are we actually giving ourselves and others for, and reminding people that everything we do should count and we shouldn't discount ourselves. So next slide. And for me, and one thing that I've been really kind of trying to take time to sit with, as a lot of this comes back to white supremacy culture in the workplace. And we've got a link at the end of the materials that includes all of that, as well as, I forgot to give you a link to the slides that you can download. But a lot of these different assumptions we have and just kind of the habits and norms within our workplace are a byproduct of how white supremacy shows up in professional spaces. And so a lot of what I spend my personal kind of reflective time doing, as well as the support I offer to others, is really about acknowledging it and learning to identify it and then unlearning it so that we're not constantly putting ourselves into really problematic positions.
So talking through all of these traps, we don't want to leave you with a, well, that was a real sad presentation. We'd like to actually be able to give you some strategies that we've utilized or that are on our list to utilize more, because we're certainly not perfect. But we also want to recognize the imbalance of power. Some of you may have less inherent power in your institution. If you're new faculty, there's going to be less power to change the entire college, as opposed to other people who have been there longer, who have more of that power to be heard by multiple people who also have power and influence. So we want to make sure that we're reflective of that, and also talking about what is in your personal control and what can you continue to advocate for change, while also not wanting you to threaten your position necessarily, but just recognizing that there is going to be a power imbalance, but that also it's not all on you.
So to me, one of the most like anchoring processes that I need to stay kind of fully present and connected to the work that I'm doing is self-reflection. And it becomes especially important when I'm feeling overwhelmed or unsure. And so I've given you here some of the reoccurring questions that I come back to. For some, like there's an ebb and flow of our careers, right? So, and when you first start off, I think is for many people like the most intense. But coming back to these questions really helps me to kind of center myself and make sure that the work I'm doing is consistent with my goals and values, which is why I have it here. Especially in times of overwhelm, it's easy to drift substantially from that. And so I recommend at least going through it annually, if not like semesterly or whatever kind of term system you're on. But depending on the time and the general, like the ebb and flow of the work that I'm doing, I actually have to like come back to it more frequently than that, whether it's monthly or sometimes frequently, not necessarily all of these questions, but at times, especially when I find myself overcommitting, or if I'm just like dealing with that like dissatisfaction with what I've been doing, I come back to like, how am I honoring my boundaries? What am I doing that is actually advancing my goals? How is the work that I'm doing consistent with my values as a professional and just a person in general? Thinking about what are the barriers and supports that I have can be really helpful in identifying needs for myself. Increasingly, I think about like, how am I actually connecting to others with the work I'm doing, whether this is my students, my colleagues, my collaborators beyond my institution, the communities that we work with here. And one thing that I added to this, as I particularly, honestly, March 2020 was like, how am I thinking about my time? Because so much changed about how I was actually using my time in that space. And so having these questions, going through them regularly. And I used to actually schedule, like when I was like my first several years, this was like an end of semester, beginning of semester kind of process of like checking in with myself on how things were going. And for me, it became really helpful to making peace with the fact that like my performance was not consistent at all, frankly. And so, and becoming okay with the fact that it wasn't going to be this like consistent linear trajectory, whether I was talking about my development and output as a scholar or what I'm able to do in other spheres of my work. But it helped to, again, like for me to center myself and check myself around what I was doing. We can go to the next slide. One thing that also became really important, even in part of making peace with that, the variations in personal performance, is meeting yourself with compassion, right? A lot of us are really good at giving compassion and grace to other people. And I'm a psychologist, so like we're really good about that with other people. What I've found, at least within like my professional networks, is we're really bad at doing it for ourselves, right? I have amazingly supportive colleagues like in my program. I am grateful for them every day. And one thing we do that with each other is when we're getting really down, if something isn't working out, if we weren't able to hit certain goals the way we had projected, because Lord knows COVID upended all of our plans and timelines. And for particularly for those of us who are doing like work with schools, with everybody in survival mode, all of that went sideways, right? And so making peace with that is really hard, admittedly. And so with a lot of the folks that are my friends, we have this thing that we do is like, what would you say if, when they're like really down on themselves, what would you say if this was me complaining, right? What would you say if this was me putting myself down? And it's like, oh man, because we're great at supporting each other, right? We're not great at doing it for ourselves. But the fundamentally self-compassion comes back to meeting yourself with the same understanding, support, and caring that you would give a loved one or friend. And it's something we have to practice. And especially when we're in kind of these high intensity, like stressful situations, pandemics are a great example. It's really easy to blame ourselves before we think about like the different contextual factors that contribute to it. And so practicing that habitually is a really key piece of achieving any kind of like semblance of wellness and personal satisfaction. The next slide. The next piece I find myself reflecting on more and more personally, but also when I'm working with like early career folks and new hires and my supervisees, is thinking about what are the boundaries that we're bringing into our professional context. And for academics, that can be a really important lesson, especially given the complexities of our institutions because of what this card says, like the institution cannot love us. And this was something that Tressa McMillan Cottom had tweeted recently and has now like spawned a series of greeting cards. But this was also a basic lesson that was shared with me by a senior colleague in my first semester, where he's like, we have this idealized version of higher ed and of like the ivory tower and these academic institutions. But he said like fundamentally they are businesses first and foremost. And they will never take care. And he was telling me they will never take care of me the way I will need to be taken care of. That is my priority always. It should be, because I can't rely on the institution to do what is best for me. Like that I have to look out for myself first. And so thinking about the boundaries we hold to take care of ourselves is a really important thing, I think. And it's better to identify them early and proactively rather than to identify them when things go wrong. And so these are any of our personal limits or guidelines about how we want to conduct ourselves and be treated with others. And so for me, I've got different kind of boundaries that I hold for how I engage and how like I use space. So things like in a pandemic context, who do I welcome into my home and who gets a Zoom background, right? That's a boundary. How do I use my time? When am I going to work on certain things? When am I going to engage with different people depending on their roles in my lives? How and when I communicate with folks, all of those are boundaries. And again, thinking about them from the outset, as opposed to when something we've implicitly held as a boundary gets violated, is one way to set ourselves up for success. So we can go to the next slide.
So this is definitely my hardest area because guilt gets in my way a lot. Last weekend, my son made a passing comment. He's 14, so he makes a lot of passing comments, but made a passing comment about, oh, I wish you had more time for me. right? So there's nothing quite like mom guilt. So then I'm crying at the dining room table and my wife is trying to be like, well, what would you say in your presentation? Like, thanks. So it's this idea of how do we conceptualize our time and how much is our time driven by our guilt? And how much of that is driven by what's good for us? And are we always thinking that we're borrowing time from some other place? Because then we're always in the red. We're always running in the red if you think about yourself as borrowing time from one role or another. So in my instance, I'm often in the red when I think about borrowing time from being a mom. And that doesn't feel good. And then I just don't do anything, because how can you do anything in that space, right? So rethinking your time and what it means to you, and trying to let go of that guilt as much as you can, so that it's more meaningful and you stop thinking about how you're taking away from other places because you don't get to catch up. So we wanted to do
skip this for time. We'll
yeah,
circle
I
back.
was gonna say we were gonna do this, but Amanda and I like to talk about this topic, obviously. So another thing to think about with your time is you are going to get so many different opportunities. You probably already have. Someone's going to ask you to teach another class, or someone's going to ask you to join this committee or that committee, or this community leader, be a community leader in this area, or join the PTA, or be the soccer coach, or so many different opportunities are going to come your way. And you really have to think about what is going to be an opportunity for me that's in line with some of my goals, and what's going to be a time thief. So as an example, my wonderful daughter is in Girl Scouts, and the Girl Scout leader was like, oh, hey, we could really use another Girl Scout leader. Not in line with my goals. I can't do it. Of course, guilt is up there, right? Guilt. But I had to say no, and I had to be okay with the guilt that I was going to feel, and let it happen, and then move on, because that's not how I wanted to spend my time. That would have taken time away from some of my goals. And honestly, when you work in education and you work with kids all day long, it's really hard to have the patience to continue to have more kids around you all the time in the evenings too. That's just me. I don't have that much patience in my life.
So I think it can be really helpful to be systematic about thinking about vetting those new opportunities. And I put this, the tweet on the right is sometimes basically like what it should be, right? That something new comes up. Do you have time for it? The answer is always no, right? But realistically thinking, like, and the picture on the left is actually from my actual bulletin board, which is a 3-step system that I appropriated from a book by Gretchen Rubin. Basically 3 questions before I say yes to anything. Do I want to? Because sometimes we say, I think in academic spaces, we can say yes to things, even though the answer, we definitely don't want to do it. The second question, do I have time? And then the third is it in line with my goals and values? Which is why it becomes really important to repeatedly be engaging in that self-reflection about what those are, so that when you get that email about something, or you see some new opportunity come up, that you can actually make a really intentional decision about it. And I didn't start doing this early enough in my career. It's something that I went through a period when I was doing all like the time management books, because I was like, this is not working. I'm constantly overwhelmed and overloaded and working at times I definitely do not want to be working. But doing this quick check-in and keeping this, like, literally it's right here in front of me, where when something comes through, can I answer yes to at least 2 of those questions? If I can't, it's an automatic no. Even if I can answer yes, then it triggers some additional consideration about, like, is it actually viable? Are there things that I can quit, quite frankly, or shift around to create space? If that doesn't work, I think even just like having a gut check and then waiting 24 hours. So before I started relying on those 3 questions, I went through a period where I just took 24 hours before I considered anything, because I recognized that I have people pleaser tendencies, and being kind of a first-gen grad student and not having the mentor, I didn't know. Like, you never know when the opportunity is going to be the last one. You don't know which opportunity is going to be like the anchor one that's going to lead to other things. And so just taking that time to really like pause, because I used to be an automatic yes on everything. If somebody asked me to work on a project, if they had some new thing or some committee or something with the professional association, I would just say yes to it all because I didn't know better. And so this came out of like a lot of missteps and regret, was actually like taking the time to be really systematic about making those decisions. And I recognize that it's really hard because like right now in a lot of my mentoring, particularly with early career folks who are first gen, like we are not socialized to be able to even say no to this stuff. And so we're coming up against decades of that kind of socialization and the expectation to say yes, but also like we're operating in what was for a long time for us a vacuum where we had no like external, like I said, like people who understood these systems to help us navigate them. And so for a lot of us, how we became successful and got to where we are was to saying yes to everything and doing everything. But at some point that doesn't work for us anymore. And particularly like post-grad, it really doesn't, because the more you do, the more opportunities you'll have. But again, it's never going to be physically possible to engage in all of them. So we can go ahead and move on. So again, one thing, and I wanted to emphasize here, was actually like being able to say no and allowing yourself to say no is a really important feature, right? And depending on your personal experiences and how you grew up and your previous educational experiences, it can be really hard. Particularly if we came from like family and community contexts with really loose boundaries about things, that makes it even more challenging. And so what I've given you here is like my actual template that I use now when I need to say no to something. If it's something that I would like to do, but honestly just can't handle right now, I give them both sentences. So thank you for this opportunity, but I'm currently unavailable. Please keep me in mind for the future. If I don't actually want to do it, I just leave that second sentence off. I do not give excuses beyond availability because it doesn't, for me, it's like one of my boundaries is like, what information are people entitled to? And they're not. Given that this is folks newer in their positions here, I think figuring out who you can consult to if you're really not sure about something, like if you're not sure if it's consistent with your goals and values, right? Like then you need somebody to help you understand like what are the nuances of it. And if you're in a space that's really functional and supportive, having people who can sometimes say no to you, say no for you. Like when I came here, one of the senior people thought it'd be a really great idea to have all of the new faculty do 90-minute colloquia, different from their job talks that got them hired, mind you, about their research and what they plan to do for the next eternity. And one of the senior folks was just like, I'm gonna say, when they found out this was requested of all of us, because it was just somebody who decided they would invite us all to like schedule these department-wide presentations while we're trying to like launch our new classes and figure out like where the mailrooms are and all the things you do. And so they were nice enough to say no to some of those things. And I'm very grateful because it's like, sometimes we just don't even know what we can or can't say no to.
So one of the pieces that you can start doing now is really finding that support network and finding mentors. So this is a link, the faculty support place, finding affinity groups on campus or seeking to create ones on your own, finding other stories and support. So the faculty parent is a great little blog just talking about all of the complexities of being a parent and being a faculty member. There's a Facebook group called Higher Ed Learning Collective, and it's thousands of different people who work in academia. And a lot of it is like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, or what do you think about these grading policies? Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it isn't, but just trying to find other ways and other people to help you feel less alone. Sometimes being new faculty can feel very alienating, and you're trying to do a lot all on your own and you're not sure where to turn to. So definitely finding people to commiserate with can be really helpful. But also at the department and in the institution, it's important for the places that we work to really think about what a leader is. We have a certain vision of what it means to be a leader, but that's a very white-centric male version of leadership. And we need to think about how we can have sustainable leadership in multiple ways and have that be valued as well. Also creating formal mentoring networks, having things like this, having a whole committee for new faculty is really amazing, where they are trying to support you in every way possible. And continuing this community is great to have that support network. Continuing to have training on power dynamics. We try to address some of those power differentials, but it's important when somebody's asking you something that they're recognizing the power that they have and the power that you have, and how that's going to impact your response or what you feel you can say. And also, of course, strategies for promoting equity to try to make that power not be as powerful, basically, in making those decisions and getting you to a place where you feel like you don't have a choice as to whether you can say yes or no. And again, reconsidering this concept of work. What does it mean to work? Does work doesn't have to show something. You don't have to have a physical product in order for it to be work and in order for it to be meaningful. So really thinking about all of those other things that are a part of our careers where we don't have a physical product, and making sure that when we're thinking about our FTE, that's accounted for.
I think we'll skip to the conclusion, and then if there's no questions, we can circle back.
Yeah. So just kind of to wrap it up, we have a lot of work to do in terms of our own reframing, because we've fallen into these traps, and it is absolutely a habit, but we can keep trying to be reflective and aware of how we are engaging in these, and that it's damaging ourselves and our own well-being. But we also need to continually think about what is within our locus of control, and recognize that the responsibility for change isn't just within ourselves, but it falls on the institutions and the larger power structures that are in play as well, and advocating for those changes as much as possible.
So do folks have any questions? I don't know if folks came in thinking we were going to do like 5 hacks to achieve work-life balance. There aren't any hacks because what works is going to vary from person to person. But if anybody has questions about anything we've shared today, now would be a great time. Well, then I would just want to point out, because I know we're close on time, and I'm not sure if folks have another session right after this, but we do have the last 2 pages of the handout that was shared has both links to the references that we used in this, as well as a variety of different resources. There's some different social media accounts that I really find helpful, as well as a couple different links about self-compassion and teaching, which I think is increasingly important given the added challenges of teaching in what is a continued pandemic, although things are definitely increasing. But I'm a health disparities researcher, so one of the areas of work that I do is about kind of the long-term repercussions of this that we can expect within schools and for students. And so I would emphasize the need to continue thinking about self-compassion as we think about the years to come. And then we've also given you a few different books here that we found helpful, ranging from thinking about these systemic issues to the work that we can do individually to set boundaries, to develop self-compassion. So thank you to the PDC for inviting us in. And again, if anybody has questions, we're welcome to answer them, or you're welcome to email us.
I just want to say thank you so much to Amanda and Miranda. Even though I'm in my 3rd year of tenure track, I feel like every slide I could apply to every aspect of my life. So super applicable. Thank you so much. Everyone who's here, please fill out that survey at the end of Flex Day. If you can, it would help us out a lot. And have a great last workshop, everyone. Thank you.
Hey, Amanda and Miranda, really nice to see you virtually. Thank you so much for coming and doing this workshop. I also want to